a couple weeks ago in federal programs conference, and I think we've been asked numerous times for a repeat session. I think it's because the presenters are fantastic. And we know that this information is really timely as we were trying to regroup last year working on our CIPs. Just introduce myself very quickly. I am Melissa Shields, and I am the coordinator for the Office of School Improvement. And I work with the most amazing team ever. We call ourselves kind of the dream team. I call them the Avengers because we have folks all over the state that are here to support and just be a blessing to each of you. You can probably see many of us. We have a OSI background behind us, so I can see several of them if they'll just wave and do some thumbs up to introduce themselves. And I want to be very clear that each of us live in different parts of the state, so we are regionally based so that we can be more accessible to you and be from your communities. I wanted to make sure, I know Mr. Roller has joined us. I think he is en route, as we often are in our car. Mr. Roller, would you like to say hello this morning?
Yes, can you hear me? I pulled over on the side of Alabama 331, ladies and gentlemen, because I feel like it's important that we have an opportunity to see faces and share time with each other for something so important. The Office of School Improvement exists to support schools, staff, and most importantly, students. The pandemic has taken its toll on all of us. I want you to be encouraged. I want you to be motivated. I want you to know that you were chosen. You were selected, you were chosen, you were placed in the position that you're in right now because you do the things that are necessary to change the lives of young people. There's a fantastic book out right now. It's about being like the coffee bean. And what I love, just to paraphrase quickly, is don't let your environment and circumstances change you. When the water gets hot, don't let it make you soft and mushy or hard and rigid. You change the environment around you. You make your experience better. You make life better for young people. And that's our focus and our mission and our goal today, is to be like the coffee bean and change our environment. I'm very happy to be a part of this team and this family and supporting schools in Alabama. We have a fantastic team of devoted and committed people that will do everything in their power to serve you while you serve people. Be encouraged, be excited, and be rest assured that you are part of the change that will help us continue to move young people during the pandemic and eventually beyond that. And so I'm very grateful to be a part of this. You have a great day in store for you. And thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Roller. With no further ado, I am going to turn the screen and the time over to Mr. William Jones and Ms. Tori Smith to lead us in this discussion. Please know that this is not a one and done, that if you have additional questions or you need additional support, that's our job. So please know that we are here for you. So William and Taurus, off to you.
Well, good morning. I'm going to let Ms. Smith maybe quickly before she turns her screen to the presentation so you all can see her beautiful face. I'll let her introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Tori Smith, again in the Office of School Improvement, and I am working with the Region 8 area, part of Region 4. So I'm here, happy to support.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. I will let her share her screen and we will get started. We want to be mindful of your time. Many of you are spending your lunch with us, and so we want to be very mindful of that. Several of you maybe attended this session a couple of weeks ago when Taurus and I did this with the Federal Programs Conference. So you will see some of the same information, but we hope that we can hit the high points and maybe clear up any information we need to during this session. Several of you are joining us from the school level, maybe for the first time, and we will provide opportunities for questions and continued support. My name is William Jones. I serve in the south portion of the state. So I have all of Region 10, a portion of Region 11, and the southern portion of Region 4. So pretty large territory, but we are here to help and to support. So we do have a large number of participants with us. So if you do not mind, just for bandwidth purposes, it may be helpful if we have our cameras turned off. So if you will go ahead and make that change for us, just for internet, for those of us that are on maybe not the strongest internet, that might help. So today's presentation, A Whole New World, Discover the 7 Wonders of a Complete ACIP. On slide 2, you will see a QR code and also a bit.ly link. You are welcome to join us on this presentation. I know that Dr. Shields shared the link for this with you all earlier, but I'm also going to share the bit.ly link in the chat for those that want to follow along. It's in the chat for you. On slide 2, you'll see the link to register for this session in PowerSchool. So if you would like to receive PD credit for your time with us, we will need you to register in PowerSchool. And then there will be an attendance and a reflection portion at the end of the presentation to ensure you get credit. So the link for registration in PowerSchool is now posted in the chat. So at your convenience, please do that. A large number of our participants had already registered, but we still had quite a few that had not. So if you will do that for us, we were happy to award credit. On slide 4, Ms. Smith, I'll let you.
All right, this is our team. As Dr. Shields said, we are located throughout the state. We are assigned to different regions, so we are here to support. Many of us are joining you, are joining this presentation, and will definitely be able to support during our office hours. We'll talk more about that as we continue this presentation. But this just wants you to see our lovely faces, as this is the team that works so hard to support all of the districts throughout the state.
We love Twitter. We are certainly trying to build our Twitter presence. So I like to make a quick plug for our OSI Twitter. And then you can also find Ms. Smith and myself on Twitter. Our handles are listed on the left-hand side. And for those of you that attended the Federal Programs Conference and were hoping for maybe an encore of my singing from that day, I won't be singing over Zoom, but a clip from that day of that video is linked here on the right-hand side. So you are welcome to watch that at your convenience. And yeah, you know, I don't plan on singing today, but you never know with me. But that also will take you to our OSI page. So easy way to follow. In the lyrics of that song from Aladdin, when it says, you know, a whole new world, and it talks about all these new adventures, I think a lot of us maybe felt that way when we first logged into the Cognia platform and realized that we were certainly in a whole new world. And it is still, even though we have been using the platform for several years now, we are still finding new things and new features, and it is still somewhat new to many of us. So think, if you will, I'll drop this question in the chat. What do you think makes the complete ACIP? What features, and you can add to the chat, you know, what do you think, if you were to say your ACIP was complete, what does it include? We'll just respond in the chat with your thoughts. Seeing some things come in, goals, objectives, activities, absolutely. School data, plans, targeted evidence, a timeline, measurable goals, school perception, the diagnostic, goals, progress monitoring. Absolutely. Absolutely. It was interesting when we asked that question several weeks ago at the conference, we had someone say, well, it's never complete. And we love that answer because honestly, school improvement, it never is complete. Now the ACIP for the year, it has to be complete by a certain deadline, but we're all about doing what's best for kids and changing those plans when necessary, and improvement is cyclical. And so it is maybe never quite complete. So we love that response. I dropped another question in the chat, but we'll just kind of briefly talk about that. And that is, when it comes to Cognia, what has to be done for that to be considered complete? You have that circle, and a lot of people say once that circle is complete, then the plan is complete. But that's not always maybe the case, and we want to talk about that today. So on the next slide, you'll see our office put together a triangle of Cognia terminology. And we really believe that if you can address the 7 pieces in the triangle, then you are really looking at a complete plan. And so we'll talk about these as we go throughout the day, but it involves the priority statements, the strategic themes, objectives, critical initiatives, key measures, activities, and activity measures. And one distinction that needs to be made here, and I'm going to edit this pyramid at some point, is if I could put a space between objective and critical initiative, because understanding the timeline here really is a mindset shift, and knowing that anything from the priority statement down to objective is a 3 to 5 year statement. So they should be so open-ended and so broad that my priority statements, my strategic themes, and my objectives should last me for multiple years, ideally 3 to 5. And then from the critical initiative down, we're talking on a 1 year basis. This changes year to year as you make improvement changes within your buildings and within your districts. And so that distinction for me was important for me to understand the intent behind each one of these terms and then these pieces within the platform. So I like to highlight that particular thing because the timeline helps to craft those the way that they should be. Ms. Smith.
So keeping that in mind, we're going to talk about those 7 components and how they occur in 3 phases. So the first phase we're going to talk about is the envisioning phase, which is where most people are right now. So they're reviewing their data. You're looking at trends, strengths, and your areas of growth. And we're going to talk about creating your plan. We know that you all are on a deadline that's fastly approaching. So creating your plan is at the forefront. So we're going to talk a lot about what that should look like. And then we're going to talk about that after you've created the plan, you need to make sure that we are setting benchmarks. We're implementing our plan and we're checking it to make sure that it's being effective along the way. So those are the 3 things we're going to talk about when we talk about these 7 components. We're going to talk about the 3 phases, envisioning, planning, and implementing. So first you want to review your data. And in reviewing your data, we want to make sure that we are looking at all data points. So, a lot of times we talk about our summative data. We're looking at our assessments. Of course, ACIP has come in. So a lot of people are really focusing on that ACIP data. But aside from student achievement, we want to look at learning gains, achievement gaps. What are the gaps that you're noticing in your data? We're going to look at college and career readiness. We're going to look at perception data, family engagement. We also want to make sure that we're looking at graduation rate, dropout rate, attendance, discipline. So don't just focus on that summative assessment, the ACAP or your ACT, because that's the data that is at the forefront. But we want to make sure that your plan is inclusive of all your data points. So really look at your attendance and discipline, your intervention, your enrichment, guidance counseling. Make sure you look at teacher attendance. administrative and teacher effectiveness, recruitment and retention. Is this, something that's occurring in our district or in our schools? And of course, right now, we know that teacher retention is definitely a must. Schools and system data. Look at your culture and climate, community engagement, professional development, those needs that are needed by teachers and faculty and staff throughout the district or throughout your school. Continuous improvement should always be ongoing. And of course, we want to look at finances. So this is a lovely graphic that one of our team members that retired created, but it just reminds us again to look at all of those data sources. Student learning, we want to look at not just the summative assessments, we want to look at those interim assessments. A lot of you have began or created your beginning of the year assessments. Look at that data and plan based on that, the need that you have observed in that data as well. You want to look at student work samples and of course, classroom assessments, the type and the frequency, how often are they used? Perception data. We definitely want to make sure you're using those teaching and learning surveys, student surveys, parent surveys. Make sure you're pulling in that information as well. And of course, your demographics, the characteristics of your student body, whether it be your IEP, your race, ethnicity, the mobility of your students, and then of course your turnover rate and your feeder pattern. So don't just focus on, the data. When we say data, we always think about assessment data, but just this graphic reminds us that there's so many other data points that we need to consider. And again, please, if you look at school processes, we oftentimes omit our instructional data, the data that comes from our observations, our curriculum and instructional materials. Please look at that as well, because we want to make sure that you are looking at your school processes when you are planning your ACIP.
To add to what Ms. Smith was saying, when you're considering the data pieces that you might include in your conversations about the plan, it's also important to make note of certain areas where you are going to focus on in your improvement plans. In the current reality piece of Cognia, where you have to upload the data in the envisioning phase that sort of supports why you're doing what you're doing in your plan, you want to make sure that you're uploading data that supports the inclusion of certain pieces in that plan. For instance, for those of you that maybe are ATSI, maybe you have an ATSI school in your district or you serve in an ATSI school, and that is generally, that's around one particular population within your school, then the data that you're focusing on should also kind of target that population. And we should see where you've dug into that data for that population beyond those big pieces of data that Ms. Smith mentioned. So for example, let's suppose that your school is ATSI, you have a school in your district that's ATSI because of their special education population. Well, then the data that you're including as you're having these conversations really should be pulling out and focusing on that population separately to an extent. So you're having conversations around how to best support that population. And so that also includes maybe asking your special ed chair to pull data around the completion of goals in special ed. What percentage of students reached or met 70% of the goals within their IEP? Is that data you're looking at, and is that data you're having conversations about? Beyond just how those students may have performed on the ACAP or the ACT, we have to dig into those programs to make sure we're best supporting students across the board. So just want to bring that up.
I just want to add that Dr. Shields did place a link in the chat to a recent data source that has some ACAP comparisons. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that link in the chat, please make sure you do so. All right, so when you're considering your data should answer or provide answers to critical questions. And those critical questions we think about are 5 of them. And that's, where are we now? Looking at your data, you should get a picture of where you are currently. What's your state? What's going on? Where do we need to go? And then we want to look at where we want to be. So looking at our data, are we where we want to be? That's what we want to decide. So look at your data to determine where you are and where you want to be. Then you need to look at how are you going to get there. Your data points that make a suggestion or lead you to the decision of how are we going to get to where we need to be. We want to look at your resources that you have, and you want to make sure that you can kind of gauge what your next steps will be. Once you've looked at, you have a picture of where you are, you've decided where you want to go, then you need to decide how we're going to monitor to make sure that we're making progress in that direction. This is oftentimes the part of the plan that gets overlooked or the question that doesn't get addressed. When you're talking about monitoring your plan, you want to make sure that you have steps in place to ensure that you're making progress to achieving your goal. We don't want just some steps listed on a paper that sounds good. This is what we're going to do. So we have this great plan in place, but there's nothing to measure or to keep us focused on. Are we heading or are we in the right direction? Are our actions aligning to help us achieve the goal we set? So that's what you want to make sure that you monitor, or you have a way to monitor the progress. And then you want to look at how will we evaluate the effectiveness of our plan? Is this plan working or is it not working? Do we need to start over? So you want to make sure when you're looking at your data, these are the critical questions that your data should answer or that should drive your decisions when you're planning.
So Ms. Smith brings up quite a few great points when it comes to data. So data is it's integrated throughout your cognitive plan. But at this point, as we are all in the process of finalizing those plans, there are 3 places that we have to really focus on right now, that being the current reality portion, which is the data that supports what's being placed in your plan, and then looking ahead to determine key measures and activity measures. So in the plan, you'll be asked to identify key measures. Key measures are big pieces of data. So keep in mind, as you're selecting those in your plan, key measures are data pieces that I can put my hands on maybe 1 to 2 times a year, or I pull those 1 to 2 times a year. That might be ACT data or ACIP data. It may be cumulative discipline data or attendance data at the end of the year. If you use Elliott, it could be that combined Elliott data, but these are large pieces of data. And so you want to make sure that when you're inputting those in the plan, that they tie to the critical initiatives, which we'll talk about shortly. But these are just large pieces of data, things that I can't walk into a classroom or walk into an office, and I generally wouldn't put my hands on right then. This could include key measures, could include maybe your diagnostic tests that you give in the fall, winter, and spring. Those would be considered large pieces of data. But beyond that, you wouldn't put here, you may not include individual teacher observations or timesheets or those sorts of things. Those are more activity measures. But just to reiterate what Ms. Smith said, just think outside the box and think about data that ties to what you already have a feeling might be placed in your plan, and then think about large pieces of data here for key measures. So in slide 14, we start talking about these data conversations. So as you're planning for your ACIP and you're having these conversations around data as to what should be included, what's a priority, what's critical right now in my building, we encourage you to have these meaningful conversations around data. But part of that means that you also have to anticipate a couple of issues. And one might be a bias. And we see bias show up in data conversations in a couple of ways. We see that show up in confirmation bias. And these are, we all know these folks, and it can be us sometimes. We see what we want to see. Doesn't necessarily matter what the data is showing or indicating. It is what people want to see sometimes. We see this a lot sometimes when folks will accompany data pieces with a narrative that's already been created. So if you're having a data meeting and someone comes in with some sort of paragraph or excuse or some sort of rationale as to it is what it is and why, then that might be confirmation bias because someone has already put a spin on the data. The other thing we sometimes see is we choose the data we want to look at or we want to talk about. This shows up maybe sometimes when we're in a data conversation and someone leaves off a column of data from a spreadsheet, or we don't include a graph or a chart in a presentation that maybe was there initially. So we're focusing the data conversation maybe where we want it to go, as opposed to letting everyone at the table have those meaningful conversations. Sometimes we cling to outcomes of a handful of kids, or that outlier bias. I laugh because I encountered this at the school level sometimes, when you maybe have seen this in the classroom, where you'll administer a test and the class average may be in the low 60s, or just struggling, and you question the teacher, and their comment might be back to you, well, I had 2 kids make a 95. And those 2 kids provided the rationale as to that teacher saying that the content was taught and just everyone else just didn't get it. That's kind of the outlier bias. Sometimes we see this in districts. Sometimes we see that maybe districts or schools are using the same program across the board. All schools are using the same reading intervention program, but it's only working on one campus. And that's rationale enough to continue to pay for it. Well, that would be outlier bias. If it's working one place and not others, then that's a conversation that we need to have. And then finally, we see what we believe, cognitive bias. These are the folks that I just say are delusional, for lack of a better word, just delusional. Some folks are just going to see and say whatever they want to, regardless of what the data says. Now, some of this you can't avoid. Sometimes having conversations and sitting at the table, this stuff's going to happen. But we just mention it here so that you go in knowing that this is possible, and also to be mindful of that, and to encourage you to just lay the data out, have meaningful conversations around every piece of data you can put your hands on. Having those meaningful conversations we talk about on slide 15, really what's important here is focusing on the culture of data conversations. The last bullet here to me is the most telling, and that is when we're having conversations around data, when it comes to the ACIP, when it comes to school improvement, it has to sound like improvement conversations. These are not accountability conversations. This is not the time where we hold grade levels or individual teachers accountable for data that you're seeing. Now, do those conversations need to occur? Absolutely. But in the umbrella or under school improvement, in those preparation for the ACIP conversations, we want you to prioritize conversations that focus on improvement. So this doesn't, sometimes we see this come up when you'll ask about a certain grade level, what can we do to support? And then all of a sudden, everyone has a reason why it looks like it does. Why is the data like it is? Well, we didn't have a certified person last year, or someone went out on maternity leave, or whatever it may be. Those are all, okay, those are all things that are valid, but let's talk about improvement. From this point, looking at the data where we are, what can we do to improve? How do we make ourselves better? What can we try? What can we put in place that makes us better today as opposed to what we were yesterday? So prioritize culture in those data meetings.
And
so
I'm just
add those. Go ahead, Taurus.
I was going to say, one of the things that you mentioned in Megan that I thought was really stand out. It's a good concept to kind of lead your staff with, to make sure when you're discussing data or you're talking about this conversation, is that you want the truth. You don't want that trophy plan, something that looks good, sounds good, but nothing's, it's not going to drive the direction that you want to carry your faculty, your staff, your school, your district. So you want to make sure that you have, as William said, the truth and not a trophy.
Absolutely. So some of us have, if you started building ACIPs with the old assist platform, then you probably know what I'm talking about. But it felt like back then you would finish the plan, and then next thing you know, the PDF version of it was posted on the school website for the whole world to see. And we weren't always as truthful as maybe we should have been in those plans. Yes, it had our data, but we were also kind of putting our rose-colored glasses on it, or framing it in a way that if a prospective parent or prospective employee were to pull that plan from the website, that they wouldn't be alarmed by what was included. So I say this now because with Cognia, you don't have to worry about some parent or some prospective employee going to pull your Cognia plan. I said at the conference a few weeks ago, first, no one's going to go into Cognia unless they have to, most likely. But you still don't have to worry about that kind of mentality. So we want you to be fully honest in the plan. If the data is saying that you have an area where you struggle, then let's target that in your plan. And let's be really honest about and have honest conversations around that. So yes, we want the truth, not a trophy. So at this point, once you finish those data conversations, you've kind of laid out what are your key measures going to be. We're in the point where we're starting to create our plan. So we're going back to that, the pyramid, which is on the next slide. And you'll see, we're starting priority statement and strategic plans. So priority statements are derived from a combination of the two pieces in the envisioning phase, which are the current reality piece and the future trends piece. So priority statements are a combination of those two things. And it's indicating that if this is what we need to do to prepare students for the future, then we have to do X, Y, and Z. So that's where the priority statement sort of comes from. It is looking at the future. If it's preparing kids for college and career readiness, if it's preparing kids to operate in a technological world, if it's preparing kids to be emotionally, socially, and emotionally prepared for the next step, whatever that might be, that's sort of the future, what we're looking ahead to. So it's, if that's the future, then what do I do now in my building to prepare kids for that future? That's all the priority statement is. If then, that's the partnership. And then the strategic theme is derived from that. So Ms. Smith, will you go to slide 18 for me? The next slide. So the strategic theme is a 1-to-1 ratio here. So for every priority statement, there is one strategic theme, and it is simply a 1 to 2 word phrase, or like I said, one word that sums up the priority statement. So I think on slide 19, we're going to give you some examples of that, but that's really where it comes from. It is, if this is a priority for the future, then this is what I'm going to do in my building to prepare kids for that.
So when you're deciding your strategic themes, sometimes we want to make sure that our themes are inclusive, that we can cover a large chunk of data or information to address an area as we're planning. So these are just some samples. This is not the end all be all. Just wanted to provide you with just some things that we noticed or we've seen that districts or schools may use as their strategic theme. One is learning supports, and under there it encompasses your safety, attendance, discipline, FAFSA. All of those things can be under learning supports. Right now we're talking about SEL, safe, social emotional learning. All of that can go under student learning supports. We also have literacy in all content areas. Here you can address any of your strategies, your PLs, technologies, your subgroups can be addressed. So anything, all of your content areas when you're talking about improving student learning can go under the strategic theme of literacy. Math as well, if you wanted to separate the two. One of the things that I like about the next one is it encompasses student achievement. So here you can encompass everything. You've got literacy, math, CTE, anything that deals with student achievement. And of course, you have your learning support as a possible thing and professional learning. In this area, I like to address that if you're going to put in an area that you want to address with students. So if you're addressing student achievement and you're looking at a strategy, that's something that you want to put in place for students, then make sure that that kind of coincides with that professional learning. So if you're providing something for students that teachers are going to need to be trained in, then you can have that listed at the top and then address it under professional learning at the bottom. So these two kind of work together. Also, we have those 4 domains of rapid school improvement that you can kind of build those themes around, which is turnaround leadership, a culture shift, instructional transformation, talent development. You can align it to the Alabama Achieve Strategic Plan, which talks about academic growth and achievement, college and career readiness and workforce, safe and supportive learning environments, and highly effective educators. So again, you can build in your needs that you see for students with the PD that associates for teacher learning.
So
3 that I really like are student learning, adult learning, and culture and climate, because those three can really encompass any of the areas that you see a need to improve in your schools. And again, this is not the end all be all, just some suggestions that if you're looking at how do we address all of our needs in our strategic themes, how we can get that done. Now, William was saying that a lot of times you want to look at your priority statements and you kind of guide your themes based off of those, which is exactly what you want to do. But a lot of times districts will decide, hey, these are the themes that we're going to work on. You know, we want to create that continuity throughout our district. So we're going to give our schools the themes. And then from there, the schools will look at their data and align and say, hey, this is where we see we're going to go based on what the district saw as a need to improve. So not saying that, you know, it has to be done one way or the other. We don't support one way or the other, just saying that it can, when districts give you the theme, that doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, now we don't know where to go. Look at your data, because when they decided those themes, I'm sure it was based on data needs they saw district-wide. So use your data to align your practices that or your strategies that will go with those things.
Well, and I'll add a note there. We do see quite a bit where districts select themes for all schools in the district, and that is perfectly okay. Mm-hmm. But it is counter to, if you've got schools that are using the Cognia guide to develop their plans, then that's the opposite from where they're guided in the guidebook. So what I would suggest to you, if you're at the district level and providing those themes to schools, that's perfectly fine. But it would help schools tremendously if we provide the rationale as to why those themes were selected. Because as schools, when you're creating the future trends section and you're looking at the current reality portion and you're trying to decide what data to include, it's really helpful to have those rationales. So if the district's going to decide the themes, that's perfectly okay. But providing the rationale along with that to the school allows them to be able to complete the priority statement portion of the Cognia platform.
And it was asked in the chat about the three I recommended. Again, it was just a recommendation, but student learning, adult learning, and culture and climate. And only because I feel like you can address anything when you're talking about student learning. Those are the needs of how you're going to improve your academic achievement, anything that you want students to make sure that they are progressing toward. And then adult learning encompasses all of your professional development, anything that your teachers may need training on, anything that you see as a need in your school or district that are going to build that learning within your teachers. And of course, culture and climate, because you want to make sure you're addressing those social emotional learning. You want to make sure you're addressing the needs of your teachers. You want to make sure you're addressing all of the things that your parent surveys may have rendered, your discipline, mental health. So all of that can be encompassed under culture and climate. So those were the three. Again, that was student learning, adult learning, and culture and climate. So strategic themes lead to continuous improvement objectives. Now, those objectives are going to be, as William said, those things that are in that 3 to 5 years at the top of the pyramid, but you want to make sure that they're clearly defined and based on a need identified by your data. If the districts are providing those themes, then of course they've used data to determine that. And that data was probably encompassed all the data from the schools within the district. So it should not be difficult for you all to kind of base your objectives on what has been rendered or what is coming out. You want to look at they should prioritize a sense of urgency. We want to make sure that we're getting to what needs to be done. We want a focused plan, not something that's going to, linger, or we can't drive our passion or where we're going. We want something that we get behind the wheel and we're driving and we know where we're going. Direction, a sense of urgency. They shouldn't be too many that you can't narrow your focus. Again, we want to keep them 3 to 5. When we start listing more than that, then we're kind of spreading ourselves thin and we kind of, lose focus on the area that we want to go. So 3 to 5 would be a good number to start with when you're talking about strategic themes. And your objectives. They should be ambitious but achievable. You don't want to say that we're going to move 5%, but that 5% of students, only equates space to 3 kids. We can move 3 kids with, without even doing much, but we want to make sure that it's ambitious, that we're, striving to achieve what we know may be out of reach, but yet we want to be able to attain it. So we want to be ambitious and achievable. It should focus on increasing student learning and changing adult practices. Make sure that it addresses the needs of all students. So you don't want to have a plan that focuses on subgroups, because subgroups can benefit from the plan that focuses on all students. So don't be thinking about, hey, we need to address, our special ed population. We know that we've got a gap in there. And so you focus your plan on addressing that instead of focusing your plan on closing the gap in student achievement, and then it encompasses all students. So don't focus on the subgroup or those at-risk students, but focus on all students and how that is accomplished. Now, that doesn't mean don't address those areas, because as William stated earlier, if you're an ATSI school and special ed is a subgroup that has been identified as to why you receive that status, then you want to make sure that you have an activity that definitely is going to address that population, but you don't want to create objectives around that and then you leave out all of your students.
Right. And most of that has to do with the timeline expectation as well, Ms. Smith, because we, with objectives that last us 3 to 5 years, the focus that comes with being ATSI or identifying another population within the school, that may shift from year to year. So we don't want your objective to tie you to a certain population within the school, where it can be umbrella enough or open-ended enough that it incorporates all students. And so just something to keep in mind.
All right, so we've talked about those objectives and themes, and under that, we're going to focus on that critical initiative and activities. Critical initiatives are just that. These are the critical components, the things that we're going to focus on this year. What is your focus right now? So yes, you have your objective, which is 3 to 5 years, but under that objective, what's our plan now? Where do we start? That's where you start to look at your critical initiative. It details a relevant need and it guides the implementation of the activities. So activities that fall under your critical initiative are going to be action-oriented, measurable, specific, and evidence-based. The activities are those incremental tasks that will help you to achieve or implement your critical initiative as you move toward achieving your goal. Your activities are going to require evidence that is observable in the classroom and not just, something you can check off on a box, okay? And they're going to be more involved, more detailed, more specific. The language, they're going to make sure they encompass those needs that are needed, or the focus is, how do we accomplish this now? Where do we start? So an example of that, when we're talking about a theme, again, this was one of the ones that I identified. So student learning. So our theme is student learning. Our objective from 3 to 5 years is we're going to increase academic achievement and growth. Our critical initiative, what are we going to do right now? We're going to implement a high impact instructional strategy. When we get to the activity, that's where I'm going to be very specific as to what that high impact instructional strategy will be. So here the activity is I'm going to hire an interventionist for small group instruction. When I have an activity, if there's a funding that is going to be title, federal, or any funding that ties to that activity, I need to make sure I list that funding source and then how are we going to measure it. Now, at the beginning, William talked to you about measures, and we talked about those key data measures. Key data measures are those big sums or big, large chunks that are measurable, 3 times a year. Or 1 year, that summative assessment. But your activity measures need to be something that you can check along the way. This is how you're going to know if you're making that incremental progress. So you don't want to have something here that you've got to wait till the end of the year or the beginning of the year to say, hey, did that work? We want to know if this is working by 3 months from now. If it's not working and we're putting our efforts into it, then we can change it. But I need to have something that lets me know if it's working or not. So in your activity measures, you want to use something you can look at regularly, like your common assessment data, your progress monitoring data, my classroom observations, any thing that I can pull the data and say, yes, I can see that hiring this intervention, these students are making gains, they're moving up. So you want your activity measures to be something that you can look at now. All right, let's look at the next thing. So when we're talking about culture and climate, that's the theme. Our objective is to improve school culture, broad statement. We don't start narrowing it down into how we're going to improve our culture and climate this year. What's our goal now? And we're going to address the SEL needs of students. Our activity is to employ a social worker. Again, it doesn't become that specific until you get to the activity. So an activity is where you will get to that specific thing that you want to do. This is where you will list your programs, any intervention programs you want to try, any assessments that's new that we're going to purchase this, it would fall under the activity. Again, your objective, 3 to 5, broad statement. Critical initiative this year, but also a broad statement. And then when you get to your activity, it's very specific. This is what we're doing now. When you're employing someone or you're buying something or purchasing something, again, you need to make sure that you list that funding source. All right, and then you want your activity to be something you can measure. We employed a social worker. We're going to look at timesheets. We're going to look at contact logs. We're going to do surveys to see if the teachers are seeing any change in student behaviors based on the employment of a social worker. Is our discipline going down? Are the students being able to make it through a lesson with less disruptions? So all of those things can be something that you can pull and do periodic checks to say, yes, employing this social worker is working. And if it's not working, then remember your ACIP is a living document. It's something that you can change along the way.
So just a couple of notes I'll add to, just to reiterate and emphasize on the activity level, as Ms. Smith said, that's the first time in a plan that I should, or someone looking at your plan should know that you've hired someone or that you're paying for a specific product. So I should not see a product name in an ACIP until the activity line. And that protects, that's one, the design of the platform, but it also, many of you are familiar with the strategy map that is created or generated in Cognia. And most schools, if they post or when they post their school improvement plan or the CIP to the website, now they are posting the strategy map. Well, the strategy map only includes everything on the pyramid down to the critical initiative. So if you have not included your hiring someone or a product name until the activity, it prevents those pulling your plan from knowing too much of your, for lack of a better word, knowing your business. They don't know that you've hired someone, and they also don't see that you've endorsed a company or that you're using a specific brand of curriculum or whatnot. So if you limit that to the activity level down, you don't have to worry about those things being published on the strategy map and what you put on your website. I also want to note here that with the critical initiative, a lot of us that started writing plans with ASSIST are accustomed to having percentage levels of proficiency. So you want to write something that says we're going to move from 35% to 45%. If that's what you want to do in your plan, the critical initiative is the spot to do that. It is the only spot to do that in the plan. So when you write that initiative, you could say that let's say if it's reading, you want to move a certain number of percentage of folks to reading proficiency, then that's where you would include that. No other place in the platform is really designed for you to include moving rates or proficiency rates.
All right, so as we were talking and you've seen a layout or a flow of how your plan would go, starting with your theme to your objective, to your critical initiative, to your activity. As you are planning and you're putting in those key activity measures, then you want to make sure that you create a plan that you can do checkpoints on. hey, we need to stop to see if this is working. You don't want your plan to be something, again, that you put on a shelf and say, we created this at the beginning of the year, and we'll look at the end of the year to see if we accomplished what we said we were going to do. But your plan should also drive those day-to-day practices of things that, you being reflective and whether or not you are meeting the needs of your students, faculty, and staff. So here is just some suggested checkpoints that can give you a guide of, hey, let's stop to check to see if our plan is working. So at the beginning of the year, which, right, we're concluding that part now where we've gathered our data, we've planned and we're kind of revised our last year's plan. That occurs usually June, July, August, and September. As we move into October, most plans will be due, and then you'll start to implement. In that implementation, you want to make sure that those activity measures are things that you can check along the way, and you're going to check those or implement them in October, November, December. December, you may have a checkpoint. Most districts will do a mid-year checkpoint, and you'll start probably after that short month, because we all know December is one of those months where things aren't going to be as traditional in a school as they normally would be. That's when you have all your activities going on. There's so many things going on in the month of December, and you have that fall break or that winter break that's coming up. So usually that's your checkpoint as you prepare to enter that second semester of school in January, to say, hey, let's look back and say, did we do those things that we said we were going to do? We did them. How are they working? Are they benefiting our students? Are we seeing progress? Are there things we need to change? So when you get to January, February, and March, January, you want to reflect, revise your plan if necessary. And then in February, March, you want to implement your plan or implement those changes. Things that weren't working, we changed, we've updated it. This is what we're going to do now. So that second semester, you're starting to move forward with laser focus on how we're going to move our students. And then again, as you start to wrap up the year, you've got testing in April. You'll start to reflect and start to evaluate whether or not our plan was successful. So April, May is kind of your reflect, project, and evaluate your plan. This is not the end all be all of checkpoints, just some suggestions to kind of help you gauge your year as it relates to the ACIP.
So we want to include some templates or some supports that you all might find helpful. So on this slide, you will see the progress monitoring card template. This was created by Cognia, and I'll put a link in the chat to this templates document. It's also linked on the presentation, but these can be used. There are templates. The one you see on the screen is for progress monitoring, but there are also templates that can help you in the crafting phase, and in the beginning phases right now. So you may find some of these, they're Word documents, helpful when you're meeting with your teams and having those conversations. This slide has a link to the required ACIP components for Title I and non-title schools, and sort of a breakdown of what should happen in the surveys portion, in the diagnostics portion, and the strategies portion of the platform. That's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you will see the Google Docs that we use as the OSI team when we're asked to review ACIPs. So the top box is the rubric that we use when reviewing CSI schools. And then the bottom is for ATSI and non-ATSI schools. So for all other schools, the rubric in the bottom. And what we did here was just kind of put into a document what we look for. And if you reach a point in your plan where you think you're finished, then it may be just good best practice to go look at this rubric and see if you can answer or check off all of the boxes. And if so, then you're probably in a great place for your plans to be considered complete. There are also some progress monitoring tools on in those documents that you can use throughout the course of the year. On this slide, on slide 28, we have linked some presentations that we have done prior to. So the hindsight is 2020 and the continuous improvement plan is done. Now, what presentations were done by our team? Taurus and I did one together, and Dr. Karen Anderson and I did one together. And so we wanted you to have access to those. Hindsight is 2020 really dives into the beginning process of the plan, some of the best practices. We pulled some of the resources for today from that presentation. The now what presentation focuses on, okay, once this is completed, you submitted, and it goes into that progress monitoring piece that Ms. Smith just talked about. So there's some more practical approaches in there, some stuff that deals with the logistics of the platform is housed in that presentation. You'll also see some of the same things reiterated in the mid-year reviews presentation and the ACIP end of the year guidance presentation that Dr. Shields did for federal programs. So some of those Fed chats back in the spring, those are the presentation that she used and are filled with great resources. So we wanted to link those and make them available to you as participants. So finally, we understand that today probably went pretty fast and we did a lot in a little bit of time. And so you may need some additional support. And so what you'll find on this slide is a link to a document where you can sign up for office hours and you can grab a time slot. And if you want to talk to one of us that you want to chat one-on-one with someone from our team, you can sign up for a time and we will schedule that with you, and there'll be Zoom links and we'll talk with you one-on-one. If you don't have time to talk with us this afternoon, but still would like to reach out and have a conversation or want some additional support, our support request form is linked on this slide as well. You can submit that request form and the person that is assigned to your regional area will reach out and kind of schedule a time for us to communicate with you. The final piece of what we need you to do for us so that you'll get credit is if you will click on the link that's here in the chat, and we'll also try to throw it in the chat box. So the reflection and attendance form.
And as you are doing that, William, I'm looking at the chat. Dr. Shields did place a link in there. So just please copy that link, save it in your interest bar as your favorite. But that is the link to those forms. There's a Google folder there that will have all of the things that we kind of shared when we were going through this presentation, as we said, rather fast. But the links are there. There's also a request for Mr. William Jones to hit a note before we conclude. Just for the fans, but please make sure you complete that reflection and attendance form. It is necessary for you to get credit for this today. And we also want your feedback. We want to know what can we continue to do to support you. So please make sure you complete that for us.
Well, Tawana, I guess my go-to is always, especially when it comes to work, is from one of my favorite movies. Let's see. If you wanna be somebody, if you wanna go somewhere, you better wake up and pay attention. If you wanna be somebody, if you wanna go somewhere, you better wake up and pay attention.
Woohoo!
There you go.
So for the fans that love the singing, great job, Mr. Jones. Again, please make sure you complete the reflection and attendance form. And we are here for you. This is our awesome team. They're all out there supporting. So if any of you would like to say something at this time, just know we're here to support you all throughout the district, and we can answer your questions. So all of our awesome team, please feel free to say something or add at this time.
Thank you very much, Taurus and William. Again, Terry Roller. I work here at the State Department of Ed. I'm one of Dr. Mackey's assistant state superintendents. I'm part of the OSI family. William, Taurus, outstanding job. Great job. Remember, be encouraged, be motivated, stand strong during this difficult time, and let's change the lives of young people. Thank you. Good job, everybody.
Awesome.
Getting a lot of questions about the recording. So what I think I'll do is I'll share both the Zoom recording, because that will have the chat embedded with those links. We'll be sure to copy the chat as well and send the link separately. But ultimately, this will also be posted on our YouTube channel. I put the link to that channel in the chat a number of times. You'll find some other ACIP related sessions, some sessions related to high school. But please, yeah, feel free to look through our channel. We always include the slide links to those sessions. So I know many of you are coming today so that you can turn this around to your schools or districts. And you know, that's a blessing to us when we know that we're able to build some capacity, and then you can take this back and make it work for your schools. But shout out to Mr. Jones and Ms. Smith. They're always incredible. I was getting lots of requests for a snippet of your voice as well, Mr. Jones. So thank you for that. I did put a link to his presentation at Federal Programs Conference, but we can't echo enough that our job is to serve and to bless you. So thank you for giving us this time, and we look forward to connecting with you.
There is a form for office hours if you would like or have some additional questions following this presentation. There will be a link in the chat for you to complete that form and just fill in the time that you would like for us to meet with you and just provide some additional support. This will be a time if you have those burning questions just to sign up, and someone from your region will really be there to support you during that time. So again, the office hours form, the link to that will be in the chat. Please complete it and just let us know if you need some additional support. Many thanks to everyone for joining us. Mr. Jones.
Just know if anyone has any questions for the good of the group, they're welcome to ask, or